So, having completed several projects this year, that being the crew cab, that crappy truck, my Mustang engine swap, fixing my quad, a whole bunch of other projects, I decided it's time to work on this thing. It's been 3 years since I touched it. I started building this way before I had a YouTube channel, and I lost interest along the way, and it's kind of sad because this thing's pretty cool, and I think it's time to start working on it again. This thing is huge. It's 20 feet long and about 3 inches narrower than the doorway. It took some doing, but I got it in. Now I gotta shuffle it over. That sounds so easy. I mean, if with a 50-ton crane, it would be no big deal to just move it over, but I gotta do it with dollies by hand and get this thing moved over far enough that I can get the skid steer in here still, because this thing ain't gonna be moving for a while I work on it. And if you're wondering, yes, that is a big dirty 671 Detroit, and it runs.
Right.
There's still a lot of room to work. So, which I consider.
So I've got the 4-post lift is anchored to the floor, then the sling, and then the chain, and then another chain, and then a chain come along, and the back of the truck. And I'm already tired from trying to move this thing over. It is coming, quarter of an inch at a time. Yeah, it kind of does what it wants. It's going to take me some time and I'm going to be tired, but we will get it in here. This thing is huge, but it's the way she goes. So I'm just making leaps and bounds. The things that are the most discouraging, that you think are going to be the biggest challenge, sometimes turn out to be some of the easier things. Look at this clutch linkage. I stole the clutch pedals, the brake booster, all that stuff out of that Ford I stole the 7.3 turbo diesel out of, and yeah, no problem. We've got a clutch linkage. Yeah, I thought this was going to be difficult, and it turned out to be really easy. I didn't have to buy anything. It was all just garbage I had laying around. And then I've got a steering column on the go. Not hooked up to anything yet, but it's on its way. And then the steering box is on. That's all junk I salvaged from the other projects. And as you can see, steering linkage is done. I just have to do the final, the 2 U-joints, which are on the way from Amazon. And there's a brake booster. Good old Ford, eh? That's how you make a Chev better. You put Ford stuff on it. A lot of the stuff when you're building a project like this, you can build yourself. You can cheap out and salvage things. But you can't cheap out on a drive shaft. That's a $1,200 drive shaft. Like, yuck. But it had to be done right, because you don't want to be sitting next to that thing when it comes apart. So my suggestion is that this is one of those things that you have to have the vehicle assembled and sitting on its own weight, like all 4 wheels on the ground, to measure the distance between the farthest point of the U-joint on the transmission and the farthest point of the U-joint on the diff. And on this one, it was 66 inches. So I had to get a driveline shop to build me a drive shaft. But because there's no slip joint, this is a slip yoke or a slip joint, there was none anywhere on the way. So I had to have them put it in the drive shaft, which is more expensive. But that has to be there. There's no getting around it. So what happens is, as the suspension travels up and down, the length actually changes minutely. And this has to be there, otherwise it wrecks the bearings or it bends the drive shaft, and the drive shaft falls apart with you driving it, and probably comes through right about there, right into the ass area. But so yeah, you get that measurement with the weight of the vehicle sitting down, and then you bring it to the shop, and you tell them that measurement you gave them is its running length. That way, they leave you a little bit of room this way and a little bit of room that way, so you can assemble it and so that it can run properly. So yeah, these are important details. Sadly, some of the more expensive ones when building a project like this or a rat rod. I mean, if you're building a small block chev rat rod or something like that, you can, it'd be way cheaper because you have a little sissy drive shaft, but this thing takes monster, and you're paying big truck prices for a drive shaft for a toy. So the fuel system on these things is extremely simple. The lift pump right here, it just takes a fuel supply from a tank. So literally just a hose that's tied to the frame the whole way. These Detroits, they have what's called cam-driven unit injectors. So the camshaft physically injects the fuel on each injector, and therefore there's very little to it. It's very simple. There is a filter right there, and that's going to be good enough because I'm not putting any other filters in it. You guys are really going to love this. So the fuel tank is a 45-gallon drum from like 1920, and I built saddles for it years ago, but I never finalized it. And as you can see, yeah, it's just a sight glass. Like that hose is your level, and then you have your fuel valve right there, and then a fuel supply. It's very simple. It says Imperial Oil Company Limited on that drum, and as you can see, it's riveted together. Man, is that ever cool. I don't know if it holds fluid yet, but we're going to find out. So, as you can see, I've been busy with the interior. I have tubbed in the transmission, and as you can see, I have to put caulking around all the edges because there's gaps everywhere. Well, moving on from there, this thing's not meant to be airtight anyway. It's got some issues, so I'm not worried about it being airtight. But yeah, I got the shifter linkage figured out, and I got the driver seat's actually mounted, like it's done. I just need to do the passenger seat, and then this is going to be a plexiglass or Lexan, so you can see the drive shaft terming. I'm going to paint the drive shaft so it looks more dangerous. Not that it's not dangerous enough, but yeah, the goal is that you're going to be able to lift the whole cab off without touching any of the electrical. That's going to stay behind because it's mounted to the transmission. And the transmission, I'll have to lop off or make an adapter to remove the shifter. But other than that, the cab should just lift off. So that's how I'm building this. And this big gap right here, I left holes there to get to the high-low shift hoses. But that's going to have a mat on it, like a rubber floor mat. So I don't need to go any further with this stuff other than sealing it up. So it's coming along pretty well. I still have a little bit of work, but sealing that up. But yeah, it actually went faster than I thought. I've been at this pretty much all day, but I also got some other things done that were unrelated. Like I cleaned up the back of the engine, got rid of a bunch of fittings, got rid of a bunch of water connections. I deleted the air compressor and the power steering pump, and I'm gonna make plates to cover those holes tomorrow. So things were going just great until I ran out of welding cable. But as you can see, I got the grill, the rad, all mounted. I need an adapter to make this work here, but that's a Ranger hose, and that's a F350 diesel hose that yeah, it fits almost perfect. I just need the adapter piece in there, the barbed fitting. And then, yeah, I started mounting headlights, but I ran out of welding cable. As you can see, the grill's an old oil heater that I welded two halves together. Just garbage, all free garbage. And then I started mounting the headlight, but then, yeah, I would have mounted the other side, but that's as far as I got. What ruined my day was my welding cable ran out, and I had a broken spool. And if you ever had a broken plastic spool, this is how it's going to end up. Now, I tried when it was still partially on the roll to try and roll it onto another one, but then I freaked out and destroyed the roll. It's just impossible. It's impossible once it starts unspooling to put it on another roll. Like, you could probably spend a week doing it, but I don't have the patience for that, so it looks like I'm buying new welding cable. So I've been putting big hours into this thing, big hours, trying to get it done. It's got no door latches yet. The battery has no cover yet, but it's got a battery mount. And then I still haven't done the back wheels. I haven't bled the brakes, but the wiring's all done. And it's got a foot throttle now, and it's got a hand throttle now. And yeah, it's coming along. I want to test run it and make sure everything works. I bumped the starter and proved that it worked, but I'm not sure what's going to happen when I start it. I have started it years ago, but just to be safe, I pulled the intake boot off, and I've got a block there in case I need to block it. We're going to try and start it and see what it does. It might not start. Last time I ran it with no fuel, so it essentially ran itself out of fuel. I primed all the way up to the pump, but that's not a guarantee that it's going to work. It might need ether, it might need other things. There's also a fuel return line that I'm not 100% sure needs to be there, but I'm going to run it with the fuel return line there, and if I have to, I'll plumb it all the way back to the tank. So yeah, we'll try this, and hopefully it doesn't decide to run away on me. The headlights are almost done. Everything's still loose, nothing's mounted and aligned properly yet, but that's because these bulbs are burnt. So I just built everything, and I need to put new bulbs in. You don't need to bolt the mirrors on. I mean, you can just weld them too. So at idle, it was making about, it was hard to read because the gauge was vibrating because it's not finished yet. It was making about 20 pounds at idle and 60 when you revved it up. The fuel return is very important apparently. That actually is functioning. It must have just been going on the ground when I test ran it and I just didn't notice. Like I said, I got to do an oil filter. It starts and runs flawlessly. I still have to put a coolant overflow, because the cooling system's small for this engine, so there's going to be a lot more expansion than on a normal one from heat. So yeah, it's not done yet, but it's coming along, and it runs good, and that's important. And that's the kind of thing you do when you're building a project to motivate yourself to continue on, is that you test run it, you rev it a few times, and then all of a sudden you're all horned up to work on it. Look at the sweet tack I found for it. Oh yeah, I'm gonna hook that up too. I've been robbing parts off the concrete truck I bought from Peg, and it runs flawlessly too. But Peg, and being Peg, he put gear oil in the engine, so when you drive it around, it reeks like gear oil. Typical. The old concrete truck. So this thing is coming along well. Everything's wired up, new bulbs, everything's wired up, everything works so far. I still have to do the front suspension. I still have to put on a brake fitting that I'm missing and bleed the brakes. I put a new master cylinder on it. All the fuel lines, all the brake lines, everything's been tied up underneath. All the wiring loom is done. It's getting very close to completion. I still have to build a cowl for this to hide that crap. I still have to mount the tack. I still have to mount the speedometer and hook it up. I got to make a lid for the battery box. But yeah, other than that, it's coming along well. I started building door latches. Poorly, I might add. Now, is that terrible? Yes. This truck was in bad shape. I paid $50 for this cab, so, but it works like a dam. So, yeah, it can be opened from the inside or the outside that way, and it looks like crap, which is what it's supposed to. Yeah, it's coming along well. So to have Hydro Boost brakes, which is what that black thing is, your brake booster, you need to have a vacuum supply. I'm not sure if the vacuum coming into the blower is going to be enough. I can run a pump, but I'm going to try it first. That's actually going to be the theme of a lot of the stuff on this project. We're going to try it first and then see what it needs, see what has to be done. Because the less you have to do, the less it costs you. And yeah, it's just easier being lazy. So I got it out of the shop. I wanted to push it by hand, but it didn't want to move, so I just drove it out. And it's way too low to the ground, and it bottomed out. And did a little bit of a burnout there on the way out, but nothing spectacular, real slow motion stuff. What a mess. Anyway, as you can see, it's way too low to the ground. This was something I factored in. The suspension's not finished yet. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have to build arms with links so that everything can shift as it goes over bumps. So this was only just mocked up, which means I can lift it. I'm going to lift it at least 2 inches. And then on the back, I still need a tube. On the back, it's way too low as well. The gravel makes it look worse than it is. It's not that bad, but I didn't torque the U-bolts when I put it together. So I'm probably going to have to end up lifting it, which I knew a lot of this was to mock up because you're building it from scratch. You got to kind of pick something and go with it. It's a lot easier to go up than it is to go down. Other than that, it seems to run okay and drive okay. My biggest complaint is that it's stuck in low range and I don't have an air tank or anything to shift the air yet. So that's going to be the next thing. I'm going to put it in high range and see if it can just stay in high range. That was always my biggest fear, was that the rear end was geared too low for this setup and it was going to be too slow even in high range, but we'll find out. There's just a little bit of driveline angle, and that's what you want. Just a little bit of angle makes it so that the U-joints rotate properly, because if they don't, if they're too straight, you get the rollers not turning inside the U-joints and you get a condition called Brinelling. But yeah, it's coming along. At least it's mobile now. It's way easier to work on when you can drive it around. So I can leave it outside and then drive it into the shop to work on it. Yeah, that'll make it easier. Everything works. The flashers work, the headlights work, the tail lights work. Everything's good. It still needs a windshield, but I have to bring it into town for that. It doesn't have a VIN number yet. That's something that's on the way. And yeah, the struggle continues. Oh, beautiful. So the truck runs and drives. I've lifted the back end to try and get the ground clearance figured out. And I have to lift the front end now. But I figured while I had the front wheels in the air, I would dig into why I have no brakes. So all 4 wheels have oil up to them, or brake fluid. But I have no brakes of any kind. So I took this wheel off. And it's in surprisingly good shape. It doesn't really need anything. But the brake cylinder was stuck, which is what I expected. And I got it all broke loose, but it's corroded pretty bad. And luckily, that looks really good, right? Well, it does now. Good old Princess Auto, or whatever you guys use in the States. These things are like $10, and you can restore wheel cylinders for old brakes. Now, I think you can just buy generic wheel cylinders, but rather than adapt and have to redo the lines and all the other stuff I've done, I'm going to try and save these ones because they're not in that bad a shape. I'm just going to clean everything up and put it back together, and I bet you it'll work. Worst case scenario, I end up with a leaking brake cylinder and I have to replace them. It is what it is. I might even be able to rebuild these ones. So I cleaned all the parts. It's all clean and ready to put back together. The rubbers are actually in excellent condition. You do not use anything to clean these. Like, clean them by hand with a rag. No solvents, no brake clean, nothing. Because they're made for brake fluid and brake fluid alone. Anything else could wreck them. I've got a little tub full of clean brake fluid, and I'm going to soak each part in brake fluid as I put it together. And how these things work is you have a spring in the middle, and then you have a rubber, and then you have a plunger. And when you push on the brakes, oil fills the gap in the middle where the spring is, and it pushes out. Pushes out and pushes out on the actuators that push on the actual brake pads. It's fairly simple, but when they sit for a long time, I don't know if the brake fluid gets humidity in it or if it just breaks down over time, but you end up with the wheel cylinder sticking inside. And if they're not too bad, you can knock them loose and hone them like this. But if there's big pitting and chunks and there's nothing you can do, you have to replace it. I'm going to try and save it. But, yeah, when it comes to everything else, I don't wear gloves. My hands are totally wrecked. But brake fluid is corrosive. It is terrible, terrible crap. So, yeah, gloves.
Smoke right now. You want the smoke? You don't smoke, do you? Right? What do you want, all those fitness freaks, huh? Go fuck yourself.